Hello again. It's me. Who are you expecting? Sometimes I wonder about you. All right. Well, we're going to finish up this OSHA part. It's not subpart L, although this part of it is, but it's has to do with this subject matter here. So we are going to get with it. Here we go. We're going to cover these three standards in 29 CFR 1910. .38 emergency action plans, .39 fire prevention plans, and .165 employee alarm systems. So, as I said before, 165 is actually the last one in subpart L. The other two aren't in subpart L. But I figured I just kind of thought fit better here. Emergency action plans. An employer must have an emergency action plan whenever an OSHA standard in this part requires one. The requirements in this section apply to each such emergency action plan. Now, the one I'm most familiar with is process safety management. If you have process safety management under process safety management, then you have to have an emergency action plan. I'm sure there's others, and I would think they should have. Well, they didn't know at the time they wrote this, I guess, really what ones were going to be in there. But that's the only one I know of is the 119 process safety management. So, yeah. But think about it for a minute. Why wouldn't you have an emergency action plan, even if you need it or not? And if you're going to have one, even they might not be required to, why don't you follow the guidelines that are already established by OSHA? It just makes a lot of sense to me. Even if you know anything about process safety management, it's not a bad idea to follow a lot of the stuff in there on everything that you do, as far as maintenance, stuff like that. There's a lot of good things on there, having the information available and all that stuff. So anyhow, let's keep moving on. Written and oral emergency action plans. An emergency action plan must be in writing, kept in the workplace, and available for employees to review. However, an employer with 10 or fewer employees may communicate the plan orally to employees. It's okay, you can do that now, but I don't know, if you don't have it in writing, I know about it's going to be consistent. But it doesn't say, but I would think if it was up to me, I would do it in writing. Just be consistent and have it know what I said to the employees. Minimum elements of an emergency action plan. An emergency action plan must include at least a minimum. Now, again, like most OSHA standards, they give you the minimum and you could do and sometimes should do more. Procedures for reporting a fire or other emergency. In other words, you have to tell them, okay, if there's a fire, you do this. What do? Well, you go pull the alarm, the pool alarm over there by the door. Or you dial 911 or call the front desk, whatever. But you have to have procedures for doing that. Procedures for emergency evacuation, including type of evacuation and exit route assignments. Now, I've been a plant manager at a lot of different plants. Generally, when I went to the plant, for instance, when I went to California for the first time at the plant for Perfect Fit, one of the first things I'd like to do, you get acclimated a little bit, of course, get to know things, is get me the biggest piece of cardboard I could find. It's usually a box, that's laid flat, and some graph paper and tape it onto there. And then get me a pencil and a tape measure and go out there and kind of lay out the plan and put it on that board, whatever. And this was before the days of computers. And so then you could look at that, and it was a lot easier to do some of this stuff by looking at it, having that in front of you. So procedures for emergency evacuation, including the type of evacuation and exit route assignments. In other words, fire would be one evacuation. If you have ammonia, it might be a different evacuation for hazardous chemicals. So you have to have procedures for that. Again, part of exit route assignments. You have to have most buildings nowadays have that. Even small buildings, offices have a layout and we'll post it up with the exit routes on them. And when you go into a building, it's a good idea to look around, look for stuff like that. If you're in a strange building, look for the exits and look for the fire extinguishers and look for stuff, like that. You never know. Procedures to be followed by employees who remain to operate critical plant operations before they evacuate. There are some facilities or some industries where just shutting down is really could be really detrimental. So you're allowed to have employees who remain to shut down things orderly or whatever, and but you can't have them stay there, till they burn up. You have to be able to get out, of course. but they can stay there for a little bit anyhow to try to shut it down. But again, you have to have procedures, and they have to know what to do to shut it down, not just what do we do now? No, you got to know what to do now. Procedures to account for all employees after evacuation. When you have a lot of people, this is difficult. It's you have lists and stuff like that, but things vary. People leave, people come in late, they leave early. My guess, one of these best ways to be able to just ask everybody else, hey, anybody here doesn't, anybody you know missing? That's one way of doing it, because that's hard to do sometimes. Procedures to be followed by employees performing rescue or medical duties. You may have a plant nurse or something like that, and you might want them to head out to where the assembly area is outside to be searched. Maybe somebody needs medical help. The name or job title of every employee who may be contacted by employees who need more information about the plan or an explanation of their duties under the plan. In other words, in your plans, you have to say, okay, the plant manager, whatever, safety director, whatever, may be contacted if you need more information about the plan or you want an explanation of your duties on the plan. You got to tell them in the plan who to go to. Employee alarm systems. An employer must have and maintain an employee alarm system. The employee alarm system must use a distinctive signal for each purpose and comply with the requirements of 1910.165. And that's why I stuck this 1965 in this video. Really, it's referred to in 1910.38. What they're saying is you have a distinctive signal for each purpose. So you have one for fire, one for maybe ammonia release or whatever. I know we were down at the city of Heavener about a few things down there because we had a plant down there, and they bought a new alarm system for their tornado alerts. They had them all put up and everything was great. They had 5 different signals they could use in different beep, 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 or beep, or long, weak, short, whatever. And they ended up just using one because they figured if they did that, people aren't going to know what the heck it is. So how you get trained a whole town? You could do this maybe in a facility, but at a time, no can do. So training. An employer must designate and train employees to assist in a safe and orderly evacuation of other employees. Now, history has shown that people generally in an emergency try to help other people out, but you don't know how bad it is. But designate, and these are usually supervisors. And if you have employees that need help to get out, you need to have somebody to help them get out. Somebody may be in a wheelchair, or somebody may not be able to get around too good. They may be able to do their job, but obviously, but they may need help. So you need to train them and designate who that's going to be. Review of the emergency action plan. An employer must review the emergency action plan with each employee covered by the plan. When the plan is developed or the employee is initially assigned a job, so you first develop it, when the employee's responsibilities under the plan change, when the plan is changed. Now, you've been around long enough to know that this is pretty much standard verbiage with slight alterations in every OSHA regulation, that whenever you have training, it's always the first time initially when they first come to work, when they first get assigned that job, or when they, whatever, the initial when they're first doing it. And then some of the employees, their responsibilities change, or the plan has changed, or basically when something changes, they need to retrain too. And this one doesn't require a change in any particular time frame, though, which they frequently do, like with fire extinguishers. It's every year. Application. An employer must have a fire prevention plan when an OSHA standard in this part requires one. Where did you see that before? In 1938, right? The requirements in this section apply to each such fire prevention plan. Because now we're talking about 39 fire prevention plans. You ought to have a fire prevention plan whether you need one or not. Just makes sense. Written and oral fire prevention plans. Here we go again. The fire prevention plan must be in writing, be kept in the workplace, and be made available to employees for review. However, an employer with 10 or fewer employees may communicate the plan orally to employees. But again, it has to be in writing. It can maybe communicate to employees orally if you have 10 or less. Minimum elements of a fire prevention plan. A fire prevention plan must include C1, a list of all major fire hazards, proper handling and storage procedures for hazardous materials, potential ignition sources and their control, and the type of fire protection equipment necessary to control each major hazard. This could be a daunting task here, all major fire hazards. I mean, anything that burns could be considered a fire hazard to a degree, I guess. And everybody's different. If you're a woodworking company, that's a whole different than a steel company. Hazardous materials has to be proper handling and storage procedure for hazardous materials. Potential ignition sources. When I worked it was on the Air Force, we were in a secured area with nuclear weapons, and you were not allowed to bring matches or lighters into that area. Now, I didn't smoke at the time. It was no big deal to me, but you could smoke in the break room, and they had a thing like almost like a car cigarette lighter on the wall. You went and you pushed a button and it lit up, and you lit your cigarette there. And so that's how they controlled it. But you were not allowed to bring your own lighter or matches into the secure area. And that's a good idea. Real good idea. And believe me, in the Air Force, and so you had, when you were said that you were going to smoke in that area only, you smoked in that area only. If you went out of it, you would be in deep doo-doo. You smoked out of there. And nobody even tried. I mean, why would they? What's the point? And then, because the next steps as smokers, no, we'll just ban smoking altogether. So they don't want that. So procedures to control accumulations of flammable and combustible waste materials. Big source of fire sometimes, trash, waste materials. When we're doing the Heavener plant, and they were doing all kinds of stuff down there and welding and stuff, they'd cover up some of the plastic conveyor belts that we knew were fire hazards. And sometimes they would forget there'd be a trash can there with cardboard and dust and stuff in it. And I wouldn't go ballistic, but I'd get on a case, come on, get this out of here, you know? Procedure for regular maintenance of safeguards installed on heat-producing equipment to prevent the accidental ignition of combustible materials. Okay, regular maintenance of safeguards on heat-producing equipment. I don't know exactly what they're referring to, but you get an idea. Anything you have that's heat-producing, there's got to be some kind of safeguards on it. And if they have them, then you got to make sure they're in good shape. The name or job title of employees responsible for maintaining equipment to prevent or control sources of ignition or fires. So the employee for maintaining, that's just for maintaining the equipment. Probably going to be like your maintenance supervisor or maintenance manager. The name or job title of employees responsible for control of fuel source hazards. What does that mean? What's a fuel source? There's pretty much anything that burns, a fuel source. So that makes sense too. Employee information. An employer must inform employees upon initial assignment to a job of the fire hazards to which they are exposed. An employer must also review with each employee those parts of the fire prevention plan necessary for self-protection. So you let them know, okay, these are the fire hazards that we have around here. And then this is the fire prevention plan for your protection. You need to make sure you don't bring matches in here, whatever it is you have. Scope and application. Yeah, this section applies to all emergency employees alarms. Okay, now we're talking about employee alarm systems. Sorry about that. Skip to that one. All emergency. This section applies to all emergency employee alarms installed to meet a particular OSHA standard. This section does not apply to those discharge or supervisory alarms required on various fixed extinguishing systems, or to supervisory alarms on fire suppression alarm or detection systems, unless they're intended to be employee alarm systems. A supervisory alarm is, for instance, when you have an OSMY valve that's on a sprinkler system that shuts the main valve. It's usually has a threaded rod come out and a round wheel on it, and turn the wheel and the threaded rod moves in and out. And usually on a part of that threaded rod where it's closer, it was not threaded, on the outside of it, there's a little groove cut in there, and there's a micro switch sitting in that groove. So you turn that wheel a little bit, and that micro switch pops up out of that groove, and that sets off a supervisory alarm. So they call that being supervised. That's what they're meaning on stuff like that. And the supervisory alarm usually won't be like a big blaring alarm. Usually be just something that and there's a lot of ways you can handle it. It goes to your board, your main board maybe, or it might go to the detection, the people that are monitoring it. Or in some cases, you could have an automatic dialer in there and dial somebody's phone. So there's a lot of things you can do with that. But that's what they're talking about here. The requirements in this section that pertain to maintenance, testing, and inspection shall apply to all local fire alarm signaling systems used for alerting employees, regardless of the other functions of the system. So maintenance, testing, and inspection of the for alerting, regardless of other functions of the system. I think like phone system where you might have a loudspeaker, some phones where you can have a button, press a loudspeaker, and that's the whole plant. All pre-discharge employee alarms installed to meet a particular OSHA standard shall meet the requirements of paragraph B1 through 4, C1, and D1 of this section. Again, employee alarms, pre-discharge employee alarms, there are alarms that go off before this CO2 or halon or something like that is going to discharge a whole bunch of it. Usually there's a pretty big systems over a pretty big area, or else it wouldn't really be a hazard. It's going to be a hazard. The alarm goes off before they do this so the people can get out. General requirements: if the employee alarm system shall provide warning for necessary emergency action as called for in the emergency action plan, or for reaction time to safe escape of employees from the workplace or the immediate work area, or both. I don't know what they're trying to say here, but I would think for both would be necessary. Emergency actions called for the emergency action plans, or for reaction time for the safe escape of employees. I think when the alarm goes off, that certain employees are going to escape, and certain employees might have things to do to react to it. We've talked about before. You might have to be on the fire brigade. You might have responsibilities for a fire extinguishing crew. You might have to run to operate, use a fire extinguisher. The employee alarm shall be capable of being perceived above ambient noise or light levels by all employees in the affected portions of the workplace. Ambient means just the surrounding area. So the ambient temperature of the room is just the temperature of the room, pretty much. So that's all around you. So the ambient noise is the noise, or light is the noise and light all around you. So in other words, if you're in a very noisy place, it's 80 decibels, then your alarm's got to be more than that. And the light, same way. Most alarm systems nowadays are both noise and light, in case people are hard of hearing or wearing hearing protection maybe, or can't hear at all, and they can have light strobe lights too. Tactile devices may be used to alert those employees who would not otherwise be able to recognize the audible or visual alarm. So tactile devices, tactile means it's something that touches your, and I would think that would be something like in your pocket or a page that would go off, like your phone. Even if you have it turned off, you might feel it humming. The employee alarm shall be distinctive and recognizable as a signal to evacuate the work area or to perform actions designated under the emergency action plan. So in other words, this has to be a distinctive alarm to evacuate the work area. The employer shall explain to each employee the preferred means of reporting emergencies, such as manual pull box alarms, public address system, radio, or telephones. The employer shall post emergency telephone numbers near telephones or employee notice boards and other conspicuous locations when telephones serve as a means of reporting emergencies. Of course, this is an old, these standards were written a while back. So I'm guessing nowadays you're going to just say call 911. Where a communication system also serves as the employee alarm system, all emergency messages shall have priority over all non-emergency messages. I don't know of any such thing, but I guess they do exist. The employer shall establish procedures for sounding emergency alarms in the workplace. For those employers with 10 or fewer employees in a particular workplace, direct voice communication is an acceptable procedure for sounding the alarm, provided all employees can hear the alarm. Such workplaces need not have a backup system. So they're referring to 10 or fewer employees. So again, you have procedures for sounding emergency alarms in the workplace. Is there a button on the wall, whatever. Installation and restoration. The employer shall assure that all devices, components, combination of devices, or systems constructed and installed to comply with this standard are approved. Steam whistles, air horns, strobe lights, or similar lighting devices, or tactile devices, meaning the requirements of this section, are considered to meet this requirement for approval. Well, that seems like a pretty blanket thing for those devices, but they say by approved, who they tell you about, well, UL or NFPA or somebody like that. Somebody has the authority to approve them, not your grandmother or your Aunt Susie. The employer shall assure that all employee alarm systems are restored to normal operating condition as promptly as possible after each test or alarm. Spare alarm devices and components subject to wear destruction shall be available in sufficient quantities and locations for prompt restoration of the system. So if you have had an alarm or a test, you got to make sure that the pull switch is pull alarm is put back as promptly as possible and put back in operating condition. And you should have spares, especially in an atmosphere like a chicken plant where it's wet and not the best atmosphere. You may have to have spares and sufficient quantities for prompt restoration of the system. Maintenance and testing. Employers shall assure that all employee alarm systems are maintained in operating condition except when undergoing repairs or maintenance. The employer shall assure that a test of the reliability and adequacy of non-supervised employee alarm system is made every 2 months. Non-supervised. In other words, if it's supervised, then you'll have to do this. A different actuation device shall be used in each test of a multi-actuation device system so that no individual device is used for 2 consecutive tests. I was just, if you're going to check the pull stations, you can't check the same pull station all the time. No. The employer shall maintain or replace power supplies as often as is necessary to assure a fully operational condition. Backup means of alarms such as employee runners or telephones shall be provided when systems are out of service. The employer shall assure that employee alarm circuitry installed after January 1st, 1981, which is capable of being supervised, is supervised, and that will provide positive notification to assigned personnel whenever a deficiency exists in the system. The employer shall assure that all supervised employee alarm systems are tested at least annually for reliability and adequacy. So in other words, if it can be supervised, it has to be. The employer shall assure that servicing, maintenance, and testing of employee alarms are done by persons trained in the design, operation functions necessary for reliable and safe operation of the system. So servicing and maintenance done on these systems done by somebody trained to do it. That's probably going to have an outside agency that takes care of your alarm system, and they're going to do it. I mean, you probably don't have the wherewithal to fix these things, have the spare parts and knowledge of how they work, etc. Manual operation. The employer shall assure that manually operated actuation devices for use in conjunction with employee alarms are unobstructed, conspicuous, and readily accessible. This would be like your pull station. It's manually operated. That's not automatic. So it's got to be unobstructed, conspicuous, and readily accessible. And that's it for these. So there you go. So these several different things we talked about in these 2 videos are covering subpart L and emergency action plans, alarm systems, and 1910 to 38 and 39, which is 39 is a fire prevention plan. So read them over, and that's it for the video, this type of video, module 14. There's some other stuff in this module, so get all that stuff done too, and we'll see you later. Be safe.